What happens to all the weapons, blades, and liquids the TSA confiscates daily? You might think everything gets thrown away, but that's not the case. In fact, something you have surrendered to the TSA may now be the property of someone else. Where do all the banned items taken at the airport really go? You're not gonna believe this. The first thing to clear up is that the TSA does not actually confiscate any items. The passenger willingly surrenders them. This is because there are multiple ways for a passenger to keep their item instead of giving it to the TSA. For example, most things that the TSA won't let you carry on the plane can be placed in your checked luggage, within reason of course. You can actually put a chainsaw in your checked luggage if you wanted to, so long as the gas tank is empty. Other items can be returned to your car if it's parked at the airport, or even mailed to your home address. You have to pay the postage, but most airports have a way to forward your belongings to you if that's really that important. But what about everything else? Where do the countless items that are surrendered to the TSA actually go? It depends on what the item is. Stuff like a bottle of water or soda is immediately thrown away. That's because there's no way for the TSA to actually verify what is in the bottles, so they're just disposed of. This includes unopened bottles of high-end liquor, which is a real shame when you think about it. On the other hand, any gun or illegal substance is immediately handed over to the local police, and there is a caveat to these items. The person who tried to bring them on board is also handed over to the local law enforcement as well. So it's best just to leave any weapons or illegal substances at home when you're planning to get on a plane. Besides liquids and illegal items, everything else that the TSA takes has a different fate. Every day, in approximately 450 airports in the United States, the items that the TSA has collected begin a long journey. Since most airports have multiple terminals and checkpoints, there are a lot of materials that need to be collected from a lot of different locations. In fact, there's even a TSA job called the property custodian, whose sole responsibility is to go from checkpoint to checkpoint collecting bins, boxes, and buckets filled with passengers' items that were surrendered at security. These TSA agents also stop at the airport lost and found to collect any items people left behind and did not return to claim. The property custodians normally wheel around carts and dollies to bring the boxes of items to their trucks, where they're driven to a facility where everything can be sorted. Every day, hundreds of pounds of items are collected, which means that when it's time to sort them, there's a lot of stuff to go through. Sometimes the property custodians will do some of the sorting before loading the truck. Certain beauty products, aerosols, and other substances that are not allowed on the plane are sorted into two categories: flammable and non-flammable. Obviously, the flammable material needs to be dealt with in special ways and is normally brought to a fireproof building on the outskirts of the airport, where it awaits pickup by a hazardous waste disposal team. The rest of the substances are either thrown out or recycled, depending on what they are. After all these substances have been appropriately dealt with, it's time to go through the good stuff. At this point, the staff who sorts through the surrendered items puts on safety gear like Kevlar gloves. In the remaining bins can be anything from sharp knives to blenders. These bins tend to have a lot of metal in them, as people forget that they're carrying Swiss Army knives, scissors, corkscrews, and any other object with a pointy end or a blade that the TSA will not allow on the plane. Any object that is a hidden weapon, like a knife concealed in a stick of lipstick or brass knuckles attached to a phone case, are thrown away. The TSA does not allow hidden weapons to be released back to the general public. At this point, everything has to be sorted by TSA workers, and all that's left are items that have a functional use. So, where do they go next? It's important to note that the TSA will hold items at their airport facility for a certain amount of time. Although we may find the security and confiscation of items a little annoying, the TSA agents are just doing their jobs. When items are taken, they're stored in case the owner comes back to claim them. This is especially true of lost and found items. The TSA does not immediately ship out items to be sold. They instead store them for a reasonable amount of time until it's deemed probable the owners are not returning for their belongings. The amount of time that an item stays at the sorting facility is normally around 3 to 4 months. Also, TSA agents never keep the things that people surrender, even if it's something as harmless as a multi-purpose tool. TSA agents are not allowed to take anything home with them, which, when you think about it, is kind of unfair since they have to deal with such crazy stuff on a daily basis. But if you ever had to surrender something at airport security, you can be sure your belongings did not end up at the home of a TSA agent. If an item is not liquid that has been thrown away, a weapon that has been handed over to the authorities, or a hazardous material that needs to be properly disposed of, it's about to be shipped to a different facility altogether. In order to move the large amount of objects that the TSA has sorted through and stored, an 18-wheeler needs to be brought in. The boxes of items are loaded onto the truck, and it drives them to a state surplus distribution center or an auction facility run by the government. This is where most of the items the TSA takes go, which is really surprising when you think about it, since the TSA collects millions of items across the US every year. This means the government has a huge surplus of surrendered items that they need to get rid of. Once at a distribution center, some of the items from the airports are put to good use. Anything that can be donated to schools or government offices is shipped out from the distribution center to these locations. These might be boxes of scissors and pens for classrooms, or letter openers for government workers. Other items that are more dangerous, like mace or pepper spray, are donated to local law enforcement so they can be used for training purposes. Anything that can be used is donated to state programs, which is much appreciated by the people who work there. However, no government agency needs thousands of knives or forgotten golf clubs, so these items have a different fate. When boxes and boxes of the same types of items like screwdrivers and pocket knives are delivered to state distribution sites by the TSA, they may be put on online auction sites where they can be sold in bulk. These government auctions can be found on websites like govdeals.com. Not everything on the government auction site comes from the TSA, but if there are items being sold in bulk that aren't normally allowed on planes, it's a pretty safe bet that those were sent to the facility by the TSA. More unique items can be sold in stores located at the state surplus centers. This isn't a bad place to shop, because since it's run by the government, all of the items were either donated or surrendered. The facility can sell them at about 50 to 60% below their retail value. For example, one reporter found a vice grip pipe wrench that was being sold for $50 at the state surplus store and was listed for $90 at one of the big home improvement chains. Buying items that the TSA has confiscated is much cheaper than going to a regular store, just something to keep in mind. So after someone hands over their item to the TSA, it's sorted, shipped, and sold by the government. You may be wondering if this is a cost-effective operation that the government has implemented, and the answer would be yes. Since the items that are being sold are basically donated to the TSA, there is very little initial cost to the government. Of course, they need to pay the TSA agents and property custodians as well as the drivers that deliver the items to the facilities, but that money comes from your taxes, so anything that's sold is pure profit. At the beginning of this program, the government made around $1.5 million on items that were taken by the TSA and sold at the state distribution facilities. And now that more and more items are being sold online, their profits will continue to increase, since TSA agents are still collecting numerous items on a daily basis. At this point, you might be wondering if something you've had taken by the TSA has ended up being bought by someone else. The answer is most likely yes, and if it wasn't purchased, it might have been donated. Either way, when you surrender something of value to the TSA, it will make the long journey through sorting to a distribution center where government workers will find it a new home. Knowing that the items you bought with your own hard-earned money may end up being resold by the government may not be an ideal situation. So here are some tips and tricks to help make sure you don't have to surrender anything while going through the airport security. If you didn't know already, the TSA has an app called When I Fly, Can I Bring?, which basically works exactly as you would expect. The app lists over 3,500 items that you can search through. When looking for a specific item, the app will tell you if you can bring it on the plane or not. So before going through airport security, it may be worth checking out any items you have questions about. Another helpful trick is that anything which is important or expensive should have a tag or label with your contact information on it. If you lose the item, the label will allow the TSA to track you down and return it to you. Contrary to popular belief, the TSA doesn't really want your stuff, so if they can easily contact you and return your property, they will do so. As a last resort, and this is a long shot but worth mentioning, you could always go to the government auction websites to track down an item. This may seem silly to repurchase the item that was taken from you in the first place, but maybe it has some kind of sentimental value. On the other hand, if you do go exploring the items at state surplus centers or government auctions, you'll probably find some pretty cool cheap stuff, so you might end up with something you didn't even know you wanted. Now watch, doing this at an airport will land you in prison, or check out the scary mystery behind the Denver airport.